And today's gratuitous food shot is champon! Hi guys, thank you once again for dropping by. And yes, I can tell what you're thinking. I've only put PewDiePie in the title for clicks, right? Well, joke's on you, my friend. I don't get clicks on my video no matter who I put in my title and thumbnail. This video was actually inspired by an interesting conversation I was having in the office about Japanese visas in general, and you know, it's a matter that is actually quite close to my heart. Not just because, you know, as I have attempted to make blatantly obvious with this lovely background, I live in Japan, and you know, I have to think about my own visa. But also because someone else very close to my heart often struggles with this very issue. You know, the difficulty of securing a visa to live in Japan. As for me, well, I'm not an immigration lawyer or a specialist, but I am a researcher. And, you know, I have a PhD that is about, you know, this much, maybe this much above just being a useless piece of paper. And because, you know, it's important to me, and hey, I'm always thinking about ways to improve my own visa situation, I've spent a lot of time thinking about this. So I can't tell you exactly what Mr. Kjellberg plans to do, but I can say what I'd do in his situation. Alright, well, you might think it's a simple matter for a millionaire, a multi-millionaire to move to Japan. And yeah, in some ways it is. If Mr. Kjellberg were prepared to just give up on his channel, he could easily move here. The problem he faces is coming to Japan, getting a long-term visa, and continuing to work and earn millions as a YouTuber. And, you know, Japan is a notoriously difficult country to immigrate to, as my aching heart knows well. Here in the land of the raisin bun, yes, I will make dad jokes as often as I can. Yeah, we don't have a so-called golden visa where you can just invest sufficient money into the country and get residency as a reward. Many countries do have this kind of system, including the UK, where Mr. Kjellberg currently lives, and where I'm from. By the way, no, I'm not going to stop calling him Mr. Kjellberg, it's too fun to say. But yeah, it's also not possible, as I've read a lot of people to assume, for one to simply buy property or land in Japan and get a visa that way. I mean, I know that well. I bought this house, and much as I love it, it has no bearing whatsoever on whether I qualify for my next visa renewal or not. So yes, the newlywed Kjellberg couple have bought a property in Japan already, and yes, it's sadly already been burgled, which I assume must have been a targeted crime by somebody who knew the house would be empty. Very sorry to hear about that, but it's beside the point. You know, owning a house doesn't take them any closer to residency or a long-term visa. So if he can't buy his way in simply by throwing cash about, how does he get here? Well, he needs a sponsor for a long-term work visa, in all probability. Long-term being a year or more, separate from what's called a long-term resident visa. That's not what I'm talking about. But yes, a company here in Japan has to fill in various forms vouching for Mr. Kjellberg and taking responsibility if he turns out to be a right Logan Paul. Sponsorship is probably the biggest hurdle all Pewds faces, because if he gets sponsorship, he's bound to a very specific area of money making. You know, for example, if you come here with a visa sponsored as a teacher, you can't really just start working as a chef. Now, there are MCNs, multi-channel networks, established in Japan that would probably take care of Felix's visa. I've also even heard rumours of YouTube themselves sponsoring the visas of certain prominent individuals. They would probably take care of Felix's visa, I mean Mr. Kjellberg's visa, and that would be all he needed for sponsorship. But I assume that's not what he wants to do. I mean, he's been pretty outspoken about disliking MCNs in the past. He obviously wouldn't want to give up a cut of all of his earnings, and you know, I'm sure he'd be acutely aware that he'd be giving quite a lot of leverage away to a network that could give him a sweet deal for his first visa, let him get established here, then start playing hardball when it became time to renew. In addition to this, even with a sponsor, YouTubers are not well served by the current visa system. Most in Japan are drifting by as specialists in humanities and international services. But that's a pretty questionable thing to call a YouTuber, especially one who is primarily an entertainer. By which I mean it might be slightly more believable for an educator, for example. YouTubers really should be artists, and there is indeed an artist's visa, but again it's a poor fit for a YouTuber. There are two subcategories of artist, performer, and non-performer. Okay, great. Sounds like a perfect fit, right? Not exactly. Not only does this need a sponsoring company, but for performers it requires submission of all the places performances will happen and the projected earnings for each one. You know, it's really set up for musicians and actors. Lawyers who try to get YouTubers onto artists' visas actually do tend to lead them towards category 2 for non-performers, but I'm not sure about their success rates. And when Felix talked about how Japan had cracked down after the Logan Paul controversy, yeah, I can't be entirely sure, but I suspect this is the area that they tightened up on. I think the reasoning was that YouTubers are essentially bloggers, and bloggers can get visas as non-performing artists if they get enough provable income. Though the visa is generally meant for more traditional artists, you know, painters, filmmakers, novelists, like me. YouTube absolutely has a performance element, so even if it's possible Mr. Kjellberg could apply for the visa and get it, it would be rocky ground that could certainly be taken away with little recourse, and he could even be fined for undertaking activities outside the scope of his visa and wouldn't have a leg to stand on. Get it, fellow kids? Epic in-joke. No legs to stand on. Alright, so if foreigners can set up MCNs, surely Mr. Kjellberg can set up his own, right? He could start a business for YouTubers, get a business management visa, and then, yeah, his video's earnings would be part of the company's income, right? You know, he's run an MCN before, Revel Mode. That's the one. Well, again, this quickly runs into problems. Business managers are expected to devote all their time to running and growing their businesses. You know, it's considered a full-time job to be the manager. Being the manager and the talent, especially for somebody under a lot of scrutiny, like, you know, the #1 individual creator on the world's biggest video site, it's shaky ground. All he'd have to do would be have one controversy, though I'm sure he'll never have one of those again, or even just, you know, get on the wrong side of one immigration bureaucrat, and I'm sure they could throw the book at him. Again, probably not a risk he'd want to take. Alright, so what can he do? Well, the freest visa is the spouse visa, so his easiest way into the country is divorce Marzia, marry a Japanese woman. I'm joking. Stop clicking that dislike button. Yeah, joking inside, I can think of some impractical options. You know, he could spend 1 year as a highly skilled professional, probably through business management, and provided he could get high enough in the points-based system, which without a degree might be a struggle, he could get permanent residency after just 1 year, and then do whatever he liked. Once you're a permanent resident, you're free to do any job you like. But that would require a year off YouTube, which, while in his current frame of mind, he might actually think is quite a nice idea, but which would probably be untenable if he really had to do it. I do think he genuinely does want to be making videos, if not constantly. Another risky play would be for him to get a work visa sponsored, any field would do, with the promise from the company that it would take very little of his time, and then apply to immigration to be able to work outside the scope of his designated visa. The risk obviously being that they could say no, especially if this extra work earns him far more than his supposed day job. This strategy does work for some foreigners in Japan who, for example, are regulars on TV shows or in bands with some level of success but that can't fully support themselves through music. Okay, now that we've eliminated most of the options that people suggested in the office earlier and that I've seen online, here's the way I think Mr. Kjellberg can get a visa and move here while still being able to continue his channel and do whatever work he likes. And based on certain recent events, it's what I suspect he might be planning to do, or in the process of doing, although, you know, I could definitely be way off here. I think we're looking at the problem the wrong way. The key isn't for Felix to get a visa, the key is for Marzia to. Am I saying that right? Is it Marzia or Marzia? Marzia, right? Marzia. This is what I would do in his position. Marzia starts a company in Japan. It could be an MCN, it could be their clothing brand, Tsuki, or they could, you know, just buy an existing business that's already running just fine and requires minimal input from the owner. Marzia gets a visa, a business manager visa, and is legally allowed to come to Japan and bring her spouse as a dependent. You see where I'm going with this? While by default the dependent spouse visa doesn't allow work, it's a matter of course for such dependents to apply for work permission and get it. This isn't like the other options where it's risky. The default is for husbands and wives of foreigners to be granted permission to work part-time, up to 28 hours per week. And I mean, I don't know how much time Mr. Kjellberg spends in meetings and such, but I suspect he can get all of his YouTube work done in 28 hours a week. And if by some chance he can't, I mean, I don't know that that could be verified by immigration. So free of earning requirements and the necessary contracts and sponsors for work visas, Felix would be able to travel often and maybe, just maybe, could spend enough time in the UK to be a tax resident there, although I'll talk a little more about that point at the end. There is a small risk with this plan that permission to work as a dependent wouldn't be granted because they specifically target him for an exception, although I don't see why given how much tax revenue they'd stand to earn later down the line, if not right away. It would be pretty odd for them to do that, but then some people think it's pretty odd they're not falling over themselves to provide him with a visa as it is. Beyond this risk, I think it's otherwise the best possible option, providing of course that Marzia is happy with her role in the scheme. Actually no, I wouldn't even call it a scheme, it would be completely legitimate. It would also mean that certain things like the recent marriage, starting up Tsuki, and Marzia no longer being a public performer or YouTuber makes sense. You know, not that I think this is a central reason why any of those decisions were made. You know, Marzia has perfectly valid reasons not to keep uploading beyond it just being convenient for them. The brand is obviously a passion project, and of course, you know, they married after a long and happy relationship because they clearly love each other deeply, not because it makes a visa arrangement simpler. Not what I wanted to imply. But these factors do mean the strategy would work neatly and, you know, give the two of them the life in Japan they've made it very clear they're hoping for. Okay, so that's my theory. My visa theory. Sorry, I don't know if it's correct, but I really can't think of a better option for the couple. I did mention tax before, and that's a whole other complicated issue. In a recent live stream, dear Mr. Kjellberg implied that he'd like to remain a tax resident in the UK, presumably because he's getting good tax breaks, and maybe just a little bit because his accountants are making lots of money in the UK that they wouldn't be making if he were paying a Japanese accountant, and that's why they're giving him the advice they are. But as someone who does have to juggle multiple tax returns from different countries, I can tell you that if he does move to Japan, he has to consider that at the 5-year point, you begin having to declare all of your worldwide income, if you're considered a resident here. But honestly, this isn't a point that I've thought about all that much, because it doesn't stop him from living in Japan like difficulty securing a visa does. You know, he might want to avoid higher tax, but he can just pay it, and no doubt he will have strong advice on the best strategies once he's established here. Tax talk! Fun times! Alright, so that's all I have to say about that. Let me know in the comments if you have any better theories, or if you just want to tell me that you don't care and I shouldn't spend so long talking about boring stuff like this, if you're a boomer, feel free to write, "Who's PewDiePie? Never heard of him." I know that is one of your favourite hobbies if you are a boomer, and if you're J.K. Rowling, please do tell me which of my book characters I should reveal is gender fluid. We're all desperate to know. And for the rest of you, have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye!